There's Satan, and then there's Georg Weissman, the ultimate bastard villain of the Sky arc of the Trail series. Georg Weissman is perhaps one of the sickest and evilest villains I've ever seen in JRPGs, in just his ruthlessness, his cruelty, and everything in between. But who is Georg Weissman exactly? What are his atrocities, and just what can we as an audience take away from his character? Now, before I proceed with the rest of this video, I want to say there are heavy spoilers for the Sky arc of Trails in the Sky. If you have not played those games, I highly recommend you go out and play them. They are on Steam right now, so get up, get out there, buy those fucking games. You won't regret it. So who is this sinister motherfucker? Georg Weissman is the third Anguis of Ouroboros, a secret society of super terrorists that make up a large portion of the villain cast of the series. As a member of their organization, he commits all sorts of dastardly and horrific acts, such as theft, murder, the destabilization of entire nation states, and whatever other evil bullshit he happens to be feeling like doing at a given time. But he wasn't always like that. You see, Wisman started out as an orphan boy from a country called the Principality of Northumbria. There, a horrible magical disaster took place called the Pillar of Salt, or the Pale Salt, where a massive structure emerged in the center of the country and turned everything across the land to sand and dust. Only a couple thousand members of the population of Northumbria survived, and Wisman was one of them. After he survived, he was taken in by the Septian Church, the religious organization of the series that provides for the continent of Zamoria that the series takes place on. He was raised within the organization and rose up through the ranks as a bishop, but was later kicked out because of his horrific experiments. He was excommunicated from the church and essentially put up for execution, but escaped and joined Ouroboros after getting an offer from the Grand Master, the leader of Ouroboros. Now, a thing to very much keep in mind about Wisman's past is the amount of suffering he went through at an extremely early age. He was the victim of an extremely disastrous event where pretty much everyone around him died. His home country became mostly a barren wasteland, and to this very point, to this very moment in the series, it is one of the poorest countries on the entire continent of Zamoria because of this disaster. A very important factor or thematic through line with the Trail series in general is how a person's environment and the experiences they had growing up as a person in the world affects the kind of individual that they become. A major idea the series puts forth is that while many things may have happened to a person in their life, they still have a measure of control over what they do with all of those horrible experiences. Which leads me to our next matter of discussion, Wisman's atrocities. So let's just rip the band-aid right the fuck off. The worst thing this motherfucker Wisman did is start the 100 Days War. The 100 Days War is an extremely important event in the Trails or Kiseki series because it contributes to a lot of the worst things that have ever happened to the major characters in the Sky arc, and sets a lot of things in motion for the changes certain characters will experience in their lives. The 100 Days War involves Wisman manipulating an Erebonian politician into launching a false flag operation where they essentially destroy and wipe out one of their own villages, a village called Hamel, the village that our protagonist of the Sky arc, Joshua, is from. The destruction of the village is then blamed on the Liberal Kingdom, which the Sky games takes place in, and the Erebonian Empire invades, and a lot of fucking people die. I mean, a lot of people die. There's abject chaos and the country is almost taken over if it wasn't for our main character's father, Cassius Bright. Cassius, with the help of Professor Russell, essentially launched this massive counter operation that pushes the Erebonian Empire out. But so much fucking damage is done. Estelle, our main character, loses her mother in the conflict. Another major character, Agate Krosner, he loses his sister and becomes this thug on the streets for a good portion of his backstory. Joshua, who was a Hamel native, essentially becomes a broken shell of his former self because he lost everything. He lost his mother, his father, his sister, and his entire village with the exception of his brother-in-law, Lue, was just leveled off the face of the earth. But this motherfucker Wisman was not satisfied with ruining a bunch of people's lives. He had to walk in and essentially offer to be the cure for Joshua's depression. He essentially uses his thaumaturgy, the magical and philosophical practices of the Septian Church, to reshape Joshua's mind, to essentially turn him into a human puppet to use for his nefarious schemes. All the while, Joshua is completely unaware that Wisman is the very person behind all of his suffering. I want you to keep that in mind, that Joshua experienced a very similar suffering to Wisman. He lost everything in essentially a big giant disaster. But instead of being a force for good, Wisman takes advantage of him and uses him as a tool. He repeats the cycle of abuse and suffering. Now, after some time, Joshua would make his way to Liberal, where he would eventually be taken in by Cassius Bright and become close with his daughter, Estelle Bright, our main character. The two would develop a very close bond and essentially fall in love with each other. The two would travel the country and eventually save it from a massive coup in the first game. But at the very end of the first game, this motherfucker Wisman, he could not stand the sight of seeing Joshua happy for 5 seconds. He's just like, I have to fuck with this guy. He's too fucking happy. He rolls up and reveals himself to Joshua. Turns out he's been using his mind manipulating abilities to suppress Joshua's memories. So with a snap of his finger, he essentially just reverts Joshua back to the way he was, giving him back all of his memories, all of his suffering, all of his pain, and taking away the small bit of happiness he managed to attain in his time in Liberal. Now, remember how I mentioned that Wisman was essentially conducting these experiments while he was in the Septian Church, right? This is the core of how he is able to do this to Joshua, how he's able to essentially pull Joshua's strings, symbolically like a puppet, as is displayed throughout the game. He essentially reverse engineered the superhuman characteristics of certain members of the church in the form of what is called a stigma, and is using that to manipulate Joshua. And it even goes as far as him commanding Joshua to try to kill Estelle, the person he cares about more than anything in the world, towards the end of the game. But thankfully, this does not play out because of the help of many different people close to Estelle and Joshua. Joshua is able to overcome Wisman's control and strike back at him with all of the friends and allies he has made down his path in Liberal. But even with all of that, and with our happy ending, it is hard to overstate how much of an impression Wisman makes with how sadistic he is, with how much joy and pleasure he takes in all of the suffering he creates and causes for other people. And that is the most important detail. His choice, his joy. He takes joy in this. Nobody's making him do it. We have many characters in the game that have suffered a lot and have suffered a lot of atrocities, especially characters who suffered because of Wisman. But not all of them chose to be horrible pieces of shit like he does. Not all of them choose to spread as much misery and pain as he does. And that is something I want you, dear viewer, to take away from all of this. No matter how down you get, you still have control. You still have the ability to choose to have morals or not. You still have the ability to be a good person. It doesn't matter how hard things get, how tough life becomes. You still have that agency, that autonomy. So it doesn't matter how horrible Wisman's background was, how shitty and fucked up his life was. He, among all of the Northumbrian characters that exist in the Kiseki series, in the Trails series, he is the one that chose to be the absolute worst. Life is hard, but we can always strive to be better. We can always strive to be a good person and to be a strength and a light for others. And to that I say, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it if you got this far. It was an uphill battle to get to the point of making this, but I appreciate it, and I hope you continue being a wonderful person if you are a wonderful person. And if you're not a wonderful person, I hope you change your ways. Thank you once again, and goodbye.